Day 4. 4 in the afternoon, and I'm standing in my kitchen holding a jar of honey like it owes me money. I'm not even hungry since I ate lunch 2 hours earlier. My brain has just decided that the next thing in my life has to be sweet. 30 days ago, I cut all added sugar. I tracked the whole month, honestly, including the days that were miserable. I'm not a doctor, just someone running this experiment on myself. I'll show you exactly what changed in my energy, sleep, and cravings, and where the sugar is poison story actually falls apart. Before the week by week, I have to tell you what I actually banned, starting with that jar of honey, since that's where most people's version of this quietly falls apart. Honey is the perfect test case because half the people I know would swear it doesn't count. Every serious definition says it does. The World Health Organization uses the term free sugars for this, that covers any sugar added to food by a manufacturer, a cook, or you at the table, plus the sugar in honey, syrups, fruit juice, and juice concentrate. Sugar sitting inside an intact apple, a carrot, or a glass of plain milk gets left out of that definition on purpose. American guidance uses the phrase added sugars and lands in almost the same place. There's one loophole that feels suspiciously convenient though. Straight fruit juice sometimes slips through, as if squeezing an apple somehow erases the sugar hiding inside it. That's convenient if you happen to sell juice for a living. So here were my rules for 30 days. Nothing with added sugar in it, and any spelling was allowed, which killed honey, maple syrup, agave, coconut sugar, and every bottle of juice in the fridge. Whole fruits stayed in, plain yogurt and milk stayed in, and I refused to play the game where you quit sugar and then blend 4 dates into a ball and call it a snack. I also wasn't allowed to quietly swap one habit for another, so the protein bar, sweetened with brown rice syrup, was gone on day 1. This whole month was just one guy with a notes app tracking his own routine, not a clinical trial with a control group. The fruit question is the one I get asked most, so here it is. Straight. The sugar inside whole fruit and unsweetened dairy consistently tracks with better health outcomes, not worse ones, because it shows up wrapped in fiber, water, and volume you actually have to chew through. Squeeze that same fruit into juice and you've stripped the packaging off, turning it into something you can drink in 9 seconds flat, which is exactly why every serious definition treats juice as free sugar. I ate fruit every single day of this experiment, and I'd do it again without a second thought. Those rules looked easy written down, right up until I walked them into my own kitchen. Day 0, I emptied the cupboards onto the counter and read every label, which took an embarrassingly long time. Most added sugar in the average diet doesn't hide at all. Roughly 2/3 of it comes from a short list of categories. Sugary drinks and baked goods sit at the very top for most adults, running neck and neck with each other. Sweetened coffee and tea come next, then candy and breakfast cereal round out the list. That part I expected. What I didn't expect was how much of my supposedly clean shelf belonged on that same list, just wearing a better font. The energy bar with the mountain on the wrapper had more sugar in it than most cookies, arriving as syrup and juice concentrate so the label could stay wholesome. Flavored yogurt was worse per spoonful than I wanted to admit. Then came the sauces, the marinade, and the lightly sweetened oat milk I'd been pouring into coffee twice a day without ever reading the back. None of that felt like eating dessert, which is exactly the problem. Sugar you don't notice is the sugar you never budget for, and it adds up faster than any actual dessert would. The worst offenders weren't even in the snack aisle. Pasta sauce, ketchup, salad dressing, and barbecue sauce all had sugar somewhere in the first 5 ingredients, and none of them read as sweet on the plate. A single serving of a popular pasta sauce carried close to a teaspoon of sugar, tucked in right behind tomatoes and ahead of the salt. You'd never guess it from tasting it because salt and acid mask sweetness in savory food far better than they do in a soda. That's the whole trick, and it's why an audit beats a guess every time. For scale, adults in the US average somewhere around 13% of daily calories from added sugar, which works out to roughly 17 teaspoons a day. Official guidance caps that at 10%, so most people are already running past the ceiling before they even think about it. I'd have told you before this month that I was nowhere near those averages, since I don't drink soda and don't keep dessert in the house. After the audit, I stopped saying that out loud. With half my shelf in a bin bag and the rules written down, the actual 30 days started. Days 1 and 2 were suspiciously easy, and I now think that's the real trap. You're running on novelty and a little smugness. You tell 2 friends about the experiment, and you assume the whole month is going to feel like that. Then day 3 arrives, the novelty wears off, and the habit underneath it is still fully intact. By day 4, I had a headache behind my eyes, a temper I didn't recognize, and that honey jar moment in my kitchen. My wife asked me a normal question about the weekend, and I answered like she'd insulted my family. The internet loves to tell you sugar is basically a drug, and days 3 through 7 are your withdrawal window. Rats given intermittent access to sugar water while food restricted do show dopamine changes and something that looks like withdrawal once the sugar disappears, and that's usually where the sugar is a drug claim comes from. But researchers who reviewed the human evidence found little support for sugar addiction as its own condition, and people don't meet the clinical bar for addiction to a single nutrient. What they do meet the bar for is overeating highly processed food in general, sugar included, alongside fat and salt. So the headache and the short temper that week were probably caffeine withdrawal from my usual sweetened coffee, or just eating fewer calories than normal for a few days. What I can tell you for certain is that by day 7, the worst of it had faded, and the craving that used to hit like clockwork every afternoon started feeling more like a suggestion I could ignore. Week 2 is where things flipped, and it happened faster than I expected. The 2 p.m. crash that used to send me straight for something sweet just stopped showing up, and I wasn't reaching for a fix to a dip that wasn't there anymore. Some of that is probably the caffeine and calorie chaos of week 1 settling down, but some of it lines up with actual research. A 9-day trial replaced kids' dietary fructose with starch at the same calories, and it still dropped their triglycerides, blood pressure, and insulin resistance. I didn't run blood work in my kitchen, but it tracked with how my energy actually felt. The craving itself changed shape too. It was still there, just quieter, and it stopped feeling like an emergency. Cravings for very sweet food seem to follow something like a fading curve. Strongest right when you cut the food out, then quieter over the following weeks if you don't feed them. That matched my experience almost exactly. By the start of week 2, I'd stopped bargaining with myself about whether a little bit of dessert counted, because the whole argument had gotten quieter in my head. I stopped white-knuckling through it, and it had just become the thing I did now, the same way I don't negotiate with myself about brushing my teeth. Somewhere in the middle of week 2, I finally worked out what that afternoon craving actually was. When you eat something sweet on its own, your blood sugar climbs fast, and your body answers with a big insulin response. In some people, sometimes called big dippers, that response overshoots enough to drop blood sugar below where it started, usually 2 to 4 hours later rather than 1. Your brain reads that dip as an emergency and asks for the fastest fix it has on file. So my 4 o'clock sugar craving was mostly me paying off the thing I ate at 2. That's also why whole fruit never did the same thing to me, and it comes down to packaging rather than willpower. Fiber and the fact that the sugar is still locked inside a whole piece of food slow down how fast it reaches your bloodstream, so the climb is gentler and the drop afterwards is smaller. Blend the same fruit into a smoothie or squeeze it into juice, and you've removed the break without removing the sugar. I'd read that a dozen times before this month and never really believed it mattered. Feeling the difference in my own afternoon is what finally sold me on it. I ran a very unscientific test on myself during week 2 because I was curious rather than rigorous. For 3 days, I ate my old sweet breakfast, which was flavored yogurt and a bar in the car. For the next 3 days, I ate eggs and fruit at the kitchen table instead. Same wake-up time, same coffee, same work. The sweet breakfast days had an obvious dead zone in the early afternoon, and the savory ones mostly didn't. 3 days each proves nothing about anybody but me, and I'm not going to pretend otherwise. It was still the most useful thing I learned all month. Once I could see the loop, the fix stopped being about resisting anything at 4 in the afternoon. The craving was already decided by what I ate at 8 in the morning, which meant the fight I kept losing was happening in the wrong place. So I stopped defending the vending machine and started defending breakfast, where I actually had some patience to spend. Protein and fiber first thing, fruit whenever I wanted it, and nothing sweet drunk on an empty stomach. That single change did more for my cravings than every gritted teeth moment in week 1 combined. By week 3, food started tasting different. And this was the change that surprised me the most. I picked up a granola bar I used to eat weekly, and it tasted like frosting. Coffee I used to sweeten started tasting fine black, and it genuinely stopped needing anything, without me forcing myself to like it. Studies that track people cutting back on sugar over weeks to months tend to find the same pattern. Foods start tasting sweeter than before, but the actual sweetness level people pick when given a free hand doesn't reliably change, and any shift tends to fade once they go back to their old habits. Your palate adjusts to less sugar, the same way it adjusted to more of it, and it slides right back once old habits returns. Sleep is the one I was most skeptical about going in because I've heard every biohacker on the internet claim their sleep transformed the second they cut some random food. Mine didn't transform. What actually happened was smaller and honestly more believable. I stopped having that specific pattern where I'd wake up around 2 or 3 in the morning feeling weirdly alert for no reason. I can't hand you a clean mechanism for that, and I'm not going to invent one just to make the story tidier. What I'll say honestly is my nights got more boring in the best possible way. And boring is exactly what good sleep is supposed to feel like. My skin was the vaguest change of the bunch, and I want to be careful not to oversell it. A couple of people mentioned I looked less puffy in the face, and I noticed fewer of the small breakouts I usually blame on stress. The evidence connecting sugar specifically to skin aging is thinner than the sugar ages you crowd wants it to be, so I'm not gonna hand you a mechanism I can back up. What I can back up is the bigger shift underneath all of this. By week 4, food had quietly stopped being an emotional decision made under pressure and had turned into a decision I made once at the grocery store and didn't think about again. The hardest part of this month wasn't the craving, it was other people. And nobody warns you about that. Sugar is welded into how we show affection, so refusing it reads as refusing the person. My mother-in-law made a cake, a colleague brought donuts for a birthday, and a friend ordered a round of cocktails that were basically dessert in a glass. Every single time, saying no cost me a small conversation I didn't want to have. Turning down food in a group makes you the guy with the thing, and I hated being the guy with the thing. What worked was getting boring about it rather than principled about it. I stopped explaining the experiment and just said I was fine, thanks, which ends the conversation in about 2 seconds. The moment you mention a challenge, everyone at the table has an opinion and a story about their cousin who quit sugar. I also stopped arriving hungry anywhere because eating something real before a dinner or a party removed most of the decision before I ever walked in. Half of what looks like discipline in public is just planning you did an hour earlier in your own kitchen. I did have one genuine slip on day 19 at a wedding, and I'm including it because every video that skips this part is lying to you. There was cake, there was a toast, and I ate a piece without much of an internal debate. What surprised me is what happened next, which was nothing. I didn't spiral, I didn't restart the count, and the next morning I ate eggs and got on with it. The rule I'd set mattered less than the direction I was heading, and treating one slice of cake as a failed month would have been the actual mistake. Here's where I have to push back on my own experiment, because doing this for a month gave me more respect for sugar's nuance, not less. The sugar sitting inside a whole apple or a glass of plain milk is chemically identical to the sugar in a can of soda, and yet the health data doesn't treat them the same, and neither should you. Whole fruit and dairy sugar arrive wrapped in fiber, protein, water, and volume that slow everything down, and every major health body that draws a line between added and naturally occurring sugar draws it there for a reason. The scarier claims don't hold up nearly as well. Sugar directly causing cancer or turning kids hyperactive at a birthday party are 2 of the most repeated sugar myths out there, and neither has solid evidence behind it. Where the real risk shows up is at the far end of the intake scale, mostly from sugary drinks. People who get a quarter or more of their daily calories from added sugar have roughly double the cardiovascular death risk of people under 10%. That's a real number worth knowing, but it describes someone drinking soda most of the day, not someone who had a cookie at a birthday party. The poison framing works great for views, it just doesn't match how the actual risk is distributed. Once I understood the risk sits at the far end of that scale, this stopped feeling like a moral fight. It turned into a shopping problem instead, and that one is much easier to solve. I didn't survive this month through willpower. I survived it through 4 boring substitutions that did most of the actual work. First, I switched from flavored yogurt to plain yogurt with fruit added by hand myself, which alone probably cut more sugar than everything else combined. Second, I stopped buying anything labeled a protein bar or energy bar and started eating actual food when I needed a snack, usually nuts or fruit, because I'd rather eat a real thing than a candy bar wearing a lab coat. Third, I checked the label on every sauce, marinade, and plant milk in my kitchen once. I wrote down the 2 or 3 worst offenders and replaced only those instead of trying to audit my whole diet every single day. Fourth, and this one mattered more than I expected, I stopped keeping dessert-shaped decisions for the evening when my willpower was lowest and moved my one indulgent thing, usually dark chocolate or fruit, to right after a meal instead. Deciding whether to eat something sweet on an empty stomach at 10 at night is a fight you're built to lose. Deciding at 30 seconds after a real dinner when you're already full isn't a fight at all. None of these 4 moves required tracking macros or reading a research paper. They just moved the friction to where I actually had willpower to spend instead of where I didn't. So was 30 days without added sugar worth it? Mostly, yes, but for a quieter reason than the hype promises. It showed me exactly where my sugar was actually hiding, and none of it was dessert. I'm not a doctor, so if you're on medication or managing a real condition, loop in your own before you change anything. If you try your own version, give it 2 weeks before you judge it, and tell me in the comments where your hidden sugar was actually hiding.